The Missouri Hills in 1904 were a quiet place, all rolling green and rust-colored clay roads, the kind of town where church bells marked the hours and gossip traveled faster than the wind. On the main road of Maplewood stood a squat brick building with a rusted tin roof. Its sign read, Dawson's Butchery and Provisions, hand-painted in faded gold letters. Every morning before dawn, smoke drifted from the chimney, mixing with the sweet tang of hickory and oak. The smell drew people from farms miles away, for everyone in the hills knew that Henry Dawson made the finest smoked ham in 3 counties. Henry was a large man with kind eyes, but a face that seemed carved from stone. He worked alone, always alone, and kept his tools sharper than his tongue. But what made people whisper wasn't his skill, it was the book. A thick, black leather book, chained to a post behind the counter. No one had ever seen him open it in front of anyone. He carried the key around his neck, under his apron, and if someone so much as mentioned the book, his eyes would darken and he'd change the subject. Children dared each other to peek through the shop window at night, hoping to see him writing in it by candlelight. The butcher's book, the townsfolk said, held dark recipes. Henry Dawson had been in Maplewood for 7 years. He'd arrived one snowy morning, pushing a cart of salted meat, wearing a heavy coat and a ring he never took off. No one knew where he came from. Some said Kansas, others whispered about St. Louis, but Henry never corrected them. He simply built his shop, hung a sign, and began working. His customers came for his meats but stayed for his quiet kindness. He gave extra cuts to struggling families, lent money to the church without ever asking for repayment, and fixed the broken hinge on the widow's barn door without saying a word. Yet there was a sadness about him, a shadow in his eyes that deepened every time he locked up at night. After closing, Henry would light a small candle, open the chained book, and whisper under his breath. The only words anyone ever heard him say through the cracked window were, "Another day done, Annie." Across the dusty road from the butcher shop lived Eliza Harper, a widow in her mid-20s. She had been married young to a miner, Thomas Harper, who died 2 winters ago in a collapse at the Iron Ridge mine. Since then, Eliza lived alone with her 7-year-old son, Samuel. Their small house leaned slightly to one side, and in the winter, the wind whistled through the cracks like a mournful tune. One gray morning, Henry noticed Eliza struggling to carry a basket from the market. He wiped his hands on his apron and walked across the street. "Let me help," he said quietly. Eliza hesitated. "Oh, thank you, Mr. Dawson, but I can manage." "You shouldn't have to," he replied simply, taking the basket from her arms. That night, as she tucked Samuel into bed, she found a small paper bundle by the door. Inside was a pound of smoked pork and a note, "For your table, no charge." From then on, every Sunday, a bundle appeared at her door. She tried to pay him once, but Henry refused. He only said, "A good meal keeps the soul steady." Maplewood had only one tavern, the Maple Leaf, and that's where all stories began and twisted. As word spread of Henry's generosity, so did the murmurs. "Man gives away more meat than he sells," muttered the barkeep one night. "Maybe he's buying forgiveness," another man said, sipping his ale. "For what?" someone asked. "Whatever's in that book of his," came the reply. Some claimed he'd learned forbidden recipes from old-world alchemists in Europe. Others swore he used the meat of animals found dead in the woods. But one story, whispered only when the lights dimmed low, sent chills down the spine. That Henry Dawson's wife hadn't died. She'd disappeared. The butcher, they said, carried her memory in that book. And maybe other parts, too. Eliza's boy, Samuel, was a curious child. Too curious for his own good. He loved watching Henry work, pressing his nose against the cold glass as the butcher swung his cleaver with rhythmic precision. One morning, Samuel stood by the counter as Henry weighed a slab of beef. "Mr. Dawson," the boy asked innocently, "Mama says your meat tastes better than anybody's. Is it 'cause of what's in your book?" Henry froze mid-slice. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he slowly set down the cleaver and looked at the boy. "It's because I care about what people eat," he said softly. "And because some recipes aren't meant to be shared." Samuel grinned. "Is it a secret?" Henry gave a faint smile, the kind that hides pain more than warmth. "It's a promise." When Samuel left, Henry turned to the locked book. His hands trembled slightly as he touched the cover. "A promise I can't break," he whispered. That night, a heavy mist rolled through the valley. Eliza couldn't sleep. Samuel was coughing again, his chest rattling like dry leaves. She went to fetch water when she saw the glow of a lantern from Henry's shop. Through the fog, she could make out his shadow moving inside the smokehouse. Slow, deliberate, like a man performing a ritual. Curiosity got the better of her. She crept closer until she could hear him. Speaking softly. "Annie," he murmured, "I tried your recipe again. I can't get it right. It doesn't taste the same without you." Eliza's breath caught. She backed away before he could see her, but as she did, the door of the smokehouse creaked open slightly, and she could have sworn she saw another figure move behind him, a shadow, shaped like a woman. The next morning, the sound of boots and horses filled the street. Deputy Frank Miller, a broad, suspicious man with a bristly mustache, dismounted in front of the butcher shop. "Morning, Dawson," he said. "Got a few questions." Henry looked up from his cutting block. "About?" "Two men from the rail camp went missing last week. Some folks saw smoke from your place late at night. Thought I'd have a look around." Henry's voice was calm, but his hands tightened around the knife handle. "You think I'm cooking men, Deputy?" Miller chuckled. "Didn't say that. Just want to see for myself." Henry hesitated, then led him to the smokehouse. The air inside was thick with the scent of oak and spice. Dozens of hams and sausages hung neatly from hooks, glistening in the dim light. Miller poked around, kicked at a few barrels, then shrugged. "Looks clean enough." As he turned to leave, he spotted the chained book on the counter. "What's that?" Henry's eyes hardened. "My past." And that was all he said. That night, long after the town had gone to sleep, Henry sat alone with a single candle burning. He unlocked the book and turned the worn pages carefully. It wasn't just recipes, it was a diary, written in two hands, his and Annie's. Her handwriting was neat and graceful. Her notes were gentle reminders. "Use more time. Less salt next time. Don't forget to pray before curing." Then, near the back, Henry stopped at the final page. It was Annie's last entry, written the night before she died. "Promise me, Henry, never forget who you cook for. Kindness must feed the living, but mercy must feed the dying." Henry's eyes stung. He pressed the page to his chest. But as he closed the book, he froze. A few pages later, one was missing, torn clean out. His heart began to race. "Who's been in here?" he whispered. 2 days later, a stranger came into town. He wore a gray coat, polished boots, and the smirk of a man who thought himself smarter than everyone else. "Name's Daniel Creed," he said at the tavern. "Reporter from the Missouri Gazette. I hear your town's got itself a mystery butcher." By noon, he was at Henry's door. "Mr. Dawson," Creed said cheerfully. "Mind if I ask you a few questions? Folks say your recipes are, well, unique." Henry looked him up and down. "I don't talk to reporters." Creed grinned wider. "I hear your wife had some unique recipes, too. Shame she's gone." Henry's jaw clenched. "You can leave now." Creed's eyes flicked toward the counter, where the chained book rested. Tell me, Butcher, what's worth chaining in a book? Henry's patience snapped. Some things are worth protecting. Others are worth burning. Creed's smile faded slightly. I'll take that as a maybe. That night, as the moon hung thin and sharp above the hills, flames suddenly lit the tree line beyond the butcher's shop. People rushed out of their homes, shouting and pointing. Henry was seen running into the woods with a lantern in one hand and a shovel in the other. The fire burned for hours before rain finally snuffed it out. By morning, Daniel Creed was gone. The sheriff and his men searched the area but found nothing. No body, no footprints, just ash and the faint scent of smoked oak. When they questioned Henry the next day, his face was pale and tired. I saw the fire, he said. I went to put it out. Did you find anything? Only what I wanted gone. He turned away, his voice low. Some recipes don't belong in this world anymore. Eliza Harper could no longer ignore what the town was saying. The whispers had turned into open talk. People said Henry Dawson was cursed, that he burned things in the woods that weren't meant for fire, that the missing reporter had come too close to the truth. Eliza wanted to believe otherwise. She needed to believe otherwise. The man who had fed her son through a hard winter couldn't be the monster they painted. So one gray afternoon, she walked into the butcher shop. The bell above the door jingled, startling Henry, who stood by the counter, his sleeves rolled up, arms glistening from work. Henry, she said softly, people are saying terrible things. They think you hurt that reporter. Henry didn't answer immediately. He wiped his hands on a cloth, set down his knife, and looked at her with weary eyes. Do you believe them, Eliza? She hesitated. I saw you talking to someone in your smokehouse that night. You were whispering. But you were alone. He sighed deeply. I wasn't alone, he murmured. I was talking to Annie. Eliza's breath caught. Henry, your wife's gone. Yes, he said, voice trembling. And I still talk to her every night. Sometimes, I swear she answers. For a moment silence filled the shop, the kind that feels like a confession. Eliza's voice was small. Then tell me, Henry, what's in that book you guard like a secret sin? He looked at her, not angry, not fearful, just sad. My wife's recipes, he said, and her mercy. That night, when Henry stepped out to deliver meat to the church pantry, Eliza's curiosity overcame her fear. She crossed the road, heart pounding, and slipped into the butcher shop. The air smelled of smoke, spice, and steel. The chained book sat on the counter, reflecting candlelight like an eye that never blinked. Her trembling hands found the small iron key Henry always left under the counter corner. She had seen him reach for it before. The lock clicked. She opened the book. The first pages were harmless, recipes for brine, smoked pork, and salt cure. But as she turned the pages, her eyes widened. There were sketches of herbs, diagrams of human anatomy, and notes written in two hands. Annie's gentle script filled the margins. Then she reached a section titled, Remedies of Comfort, when the pain grows too great. It wasn't food, it was medicine. Formulas for fever tonics, tinctures for burns, mixtures to ease breathing. Then, one darker entry caught her eye, Elixir of Mercy, to ease the suffering of those beyond saving. At the bottom of the page, Annie had written in shaky ink, Use only for love, never for gain. Eliza covered her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes. So this was Henry's dark secret, not murder, but mercy. But then she noticed something else, a gap where a page had been torn out. When Henry returned that night, he found Eliza sitting behind the counter, the book open before her. The candlelight flickered on her face. Part fear, part sorrow. You helped her die, didn't you? She whispered. Henry froze. His hands dropped to his sides. "She begged me," he said hoarsely. "The fever took her fast. She screamed until her throat bled. The doctor said there was nothing left to do." He sank into the chair beside her, staring at the pages. "She made the mixture herself. I only held her hand." Eliza's tears slid silently down her cheeks. "Then why's the recipe missing?" Henry's eyes went wide, genuine shock and fear replacing grief. "What do you mean, missing?" "The page. It's gone." He stood, trembling. "No, no, no. Someone's taken it." The answer came the next morning in a letter slipped under the door. The paper was damp from dew, but the words were sharp and mocking. "Meet me at the old mill tonight, Dawson. Bring the book, or your wife's story becomes tomorrow's headline." Signed, Daniel Creed. Henry's blood ran cold. The man wasn't dead. He sat for a long time staring at the letter. Then he took out his key, unlocked the book, and placed his hand on Annie's last page. "You told me to protect Mercy," he whispered. "I'll protect it, even if it burns me." Before leaving, he wrote a short note and slid it under Eliza's door. "If I don't return, tell Samuel that kindness is the only recipe worth keeping." Then he lit his lantern, tucked the book under his arm, and headed for the hills. The old mill loomed over the river like a dead man's shadow. The wheel creaked slowly in the night wind, moonlight spilling through its broken roof. Daniel Creed waited inside, the missing page in his hand, his grin wicked. "Took you long enough," he said. "I thought maybe you'd burned, like your wife." Henry said nothing. His lantern flickered, casting long shadows across the dusty floor. Creed waved the page. "This recipe of yours, Elixir of Mercy. You realize what it's worth? Hospitals, pharmacists, they'd pay a fortune. You and I could be rich men." Henry's eyes darkened. "It's not meant for profit. It's meant for peace." "Peace?" Creed laughed. "You poisoned your wife, Dawson. Call it what it is." Henry stepped forward. "She asked me. And I loved her too much to let her suffer," Creed sneered. "That's what every killer says." The tension snapped. Creed lunged, snatching at the book. Henry held firm. The two men stumbled, knocking over a barrel of dry grain. Creed shoved Henry into the wall, grabbed the lantern, and it slipped from his hand. The flame exploded across the floor, racing through the grain like lightning. Creed screamed, dropping the page as fire climbed the wooden beams. Henry grabbed the book and turned toward the door, then stopped. Creed was trapped under a fallen beam, coughing, choking. "Help me," he cried. "You can't leave me, Dawson." Henry's eyes filled with tears. "You wanted the recipe of Mercy," he said quietly. "Here it is." He lifted the beam, dragging Creed out the door just as the roof collapsed behind them. But the book was still inside. Henry looked back at the inferno, jaw clenched. He ran back in, covering his face with his coat, snatched the book from the fire and stumbled out again, flames licking at his sleeves. He collapsed near the riverbank. Creed crawled away into the dark. Morning brought silence. Only smoke rose from the ruins of the old mill. The sheriff's men found Creed alive but burned, raving about mercy and poison and a butcher's curse. Henry Dawson was gone. The river ran low for days, and when it rose again, they found a piece of scorched metal caught on a rock, the clasp from his chained book. Eliza and Samuel watched as it was pulled from the water. "Did he die, Mama?" the boy asked softly. Eliza looked toward the hills, the rising smoke curling like a final message. "No, sweetheart," she whispered. "He just went where Mercy lives." Weeks passed, then months. The gossip faded, replaced by a quiet reverence. Eliza reopened the butcher shop, not for profit but for remembrance. She renamed it Dawson's Provisions. The sign still swung in the wind, but now beneath it hung another, a small wooden carving that read, "Made with kindness." She never used Henry's recipes. But one evening, when Samuel was asleep, she opened a hidden drawer and pulled out a single page, the one she had copied before the fire. Annie's words glowed in the candlelight. "Never forget who you cook for." Eliza pressed her hand to her heart. "I won't," she whispered. Years slipped by. The Missouri hills changed, new roads, new buildings, but people still remembered the kind butcher. Samuel grew into a tall, thoughtful young man. He became a doctor, not because of books or science, but because of the lesson he learned as a child from a man who gave food without asking for coin. He carried a small leather notebook in his coat pocket, its cover scuffed with age. Inside, there was only one page written, "Henry Dawson, Giver of Mercy." When patients asked him why he chose medicine, he would smile gently and say, "Because once, a butcher taught me that healing isn't always about curing. Sometimes it's about kindness." It was a quiet autumn morning when Eliza, now gray-haired and frail, sat by her window overlooking the shop. The hills glowed gold in the sunrise. The air smelled faintly of smoke, not from fire, but of oak and salt. She closed her eyes, breathing it in. For a moment, she could almost hear Henry's deep, gentle voice. "Annie, I kept my promise." Eliza smiled faintly. The wind brushed her cheek like a soft hand. Outside, Samuel walked by with his satchel, waving at her before heading down the road toward the hospital. As he disappeared into the morning mist, Eliza whispered, "The world still needs your kind of mercy, Henry." She looked toward the hills one last time, and for a heartbeat, she thought she saw a tall figure in a butcher's apron standing by the river, lantern in hand. Then the wind changed, carrying with it the smell of smoked oak and peace.